Before entering into the area of hell, which involves the terrible punishments, Dante and Virgil in Canto 4 first pass through limbo. This is the place that's reserved for those who died before the coming of Christ and were thus never Christians. They're granted a place where they're not subject to punishments like the sinners, but yet they're also not allowed entry into paradise since they were never baptized. Virgil explains that this is the place where he dwells forever. He seems to complain that due merely to the fact that he and the others were born before Christ, they're denied salvation. He explains to Dante, quote, "For this defect, and for no other guilt, we here are lost. In this alone we suffer, cut off from hope, we live on in desire." Dante asks if there were ever any exceptions made to the rule, and if any of those who lived before Christ were ever granted access to paradise. Virgil tells Dante that some of the leading figures from the Old Testament, such as Noah, Moses, Abraham, and King David, were in fact taken up to heaven by Christ. This refers to the story of Christ's descent into hell, sometimes called the Harrowing of Hell, which is mentioned in 1 Peter 3:19-20. According to this idea, Christ visited hell after the crucifixion and before the resurrection. Dante's portrayal is in accordance with the church doctrine that Christ thus chose some of the righteous souls who lived before him for salvation. The longer account in this canto is, however, dedicated to the great poets, writers, scientists, and philosophers of the Greco-Roman world. In some sense, this scene recalls Virgil's parade of Roman heroes in the Aeneid. This gives Dante the opportunity to acknowledge the cultural accomplishments of the ancient world, including his own personal academic heroes. He and his guide are first met with a group of 4 poets, Homer, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan, a group to whom Dante's guide Virgil belongs. Dante somewhat audaciously establishes the continuity of his work with the ancient poets by saying that this group did him the great honor of welcoming him into their company. They move on and see some of the heroes from the Homeric poems, as well as from Roman history. Then there appear the distinguished philosophers of antiquity, who are all seated around, quote, the master sage, that is, Aristotle. As we've noted previously, in the Middle Ages, Aristotle occupied a special place. He represented not just philosophy, but all secular knowledge as such, including the natural sciences. During this period, no other philosopher enjoyed the same amount of authority. Thus, while Socrates and Plato are given a kind of honorable mention as being seated closest to him, it's Aristotle who is clearly revered as the greatest. There follows a list of the important pre-Socratic philosophers and then some of the leading Roman thinkers. Finally, mention is made of the scientists and mathematicians. Dante also refers to 2 Arabic scholars here, and this might appear at first glance to be an anomaly in his otherwise so well-ordered system. During the Middle Ages, the leading scientists most all came from the Arabic world, which was largely inspired by Aristotle. There thus developed a rich tradition of Arabic philosophy during this period. Among the scholars identified in limbo are Avicenna and Averroes. Both of these are listed among the scientists. This makes sense since the Persian Avicenna was known primarily as a medical doctor with his works The Book of Healing and The Canon of Medicine. Averroes, a native of the Spanish city of Cordoba, was known for his commentaries on Aristotle's works. Although they were great scholars, these figures do not fit the pattern of the other souls in limbo, since they were born long after Christ. However, as Dante's guide Virgil explains, the real criterion for the souls in limbo is that they were never baptized. Thus, as Muslims, Avicenna and Averroes fall into this category. Among the historical figures listed, mention is also made of the celebrated Muslim Sultan Saladin, who enjoyed a positive reputation in the European Middle Ages, even though he fought European crusader armies. While these Muslim cultural figures are granted a degree of honor in their accomplishments, by contrast, the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, is made to suffer terrible punishment among the sinners who created schisms. By mentioning these figures from the ancient pagan world and also those from the then powerful Arabic world, Dante recognizes their achievements and contributions to science, literature, and art. But yet, he clearly portrays these as sympathetic figures. They're relegated to limbo and are thus radically separated from the Christians. Here we can see the physical separation in Dante's Cosmology between secular knowledge and the Christian faith. This split is sometimes referred to as that between Jerusalem and Athens, with the former representing religion, and faith, and the latter, science and reason. The implication in Dante's scheme is clearly that while the former is very important, it's ultimately limited. It's valuable to learn about the culture and science of the ancient, but without the revelation of Christianity, it ultimately has little meaning. Dante thus suggests that faith is something that goes beyond the principles of secular reason and science. Christianity belongs to a higher sphere, which can only be reached by other means. As much as he identifies with the pagan poets, and they with him, ultimately his salvation as a Christian has nothing to do with his ability as a poet. The meaning of his journey is that of a pilgrim seeking Christian enlightenment and faith. This is something that the pagan poets cannot help him with. In the end, Dante must leave the company of the virtuous pagans and continue his pilgrimage without them. Even his beloved guide Virgil must leave him when he enters the higher spheres.